Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. Today, we are so excited to talk to a really amazingly influential person in the literacy space. She wrote a blog that caught the attention of educators everywhere, including us, and her blogs are just awesome. But the blog that we're going to talk about today is called Balanced Literacy Bingo. It debunks a lot of ideas about balanced literacy. We can't wait.
It's going to be a fun one. And so we have Pamela Snow with us today, which is really exciting. We've been reading her things for a long time. And if you don't know who she is a speech-language pathologist and a registered psychologist and a professor at Latrobe University. And her research focuses on language disorders in vulnerable children and adolescents. And we can't wait to talk to her today. So welcome.
Hello to both of you. It's lovely to be with you from the other side of the world. Morning
tomorrow.
For me. Yes, that's right. Yes, I'm coming to you from tomorrow. It doesn't. Yes, that's right. I have to tell you, the future's not necessarily a whole lot better than the past just yet, but great to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. And I'm wondering, Pam, if it might be a great thing just to start with the Balanced Literacy Bingo blog post that you wrote. I think you had said you were inspired by the ideas that kept surfacing in the conversation and this resistance to change. So would you like to say more about that?
Sure. Well, yes, I think the inspiration for that particular blog post was a series of media interviews that I'd done. Sometimes, these things all come at once and you find yourself talking to the media quite a lot. And sometimes journalists put these ideas to you as a provocation. Sometimes they represent commonly held views that are almost memes that circulate in the education community. And I found myself kind of batting back a lot of these ideas, and I thought I need to put them all together in one place. In some respects, I've already addressed them in different places on my blog post, but I think people who are working in schools where they're trying to really break loose from the shackles of balanced literacy do get frustrated with these ideas that are often trotted out in a very uncritical kind of way. They're trotted out as truths that people haven't stood back from and questioned. So the idea that all children learn differently. How often do we hear that, and yet do they? And what would it mean to live in a world? What would it mean for teachers to live in a world where all children learn differently? Just have a think about that. What would it mean for a medical practitioner if everybody responded differently to infection? That's just not actually how the world works. So I put together my, off the top of my head, list of what I think are the common tropes or memes in this space. And then once I shared that blog post, I was quite inundated with an extra set. And so added to the original set. And I think, probably there's more that could still be added as well. So it gives you a good sense, I think, or it gives us all a good sense of the level of resistance sometimes that teachers have to deal with, and the ideas that they have to unpack. They have to unpack them themselves, first of all, and then they often have to unpack them in their conversations with literacy leaders and school administrators, principals, other influential people who can be barriers or facilitators to change.
Such a good point. And that resonates so much, that especially that example that you gave, like one size doesn't fit all, and all children learn differently. You're right. I think the minority of children learn differently, right? The majority of children do learn in the same way. We've got the decades of research to back that up. And also, wow, what an overwhelming thing to think about. I've had in my class, 36 students. Can you imagine having 36 different ways of having to teach?
I think we'd all need to go and have a lie down at the very thought of that, because that's not how classrooms work. And you're right, there's a small group of children who we need to be able to identify whose learning needs are different, usually I would say in an order of magnitude, in terms of what they need, rather than an actual qualitative difference in what they need. If we look at frameworks like response to intervention, they remind us that there's this thing called dose that's really important, and sometimes some children need extra exposures to the skill that's being taught and extra opportunities for repetition, retrieval practice and mastery. But that doesn't mean that they learn differently. It just means that they need those extra exposures in order to consolidate. They may have attentional difficulties, that they may have underlying language difficulties. They may be an English language learner that's making it a little bit harder right now. But still, I think for most children, it's a dose issue rather than actually needing something that's qualitatively different.
Yeah, and I think. Oh, sorry, Melissa, go ahead.
I was just going to say the analogy to medicine is really on point there too, because the whole time you were just talking, I was thinking of your analogy to medicine and how it's so similar, and that we're if everyone has a cold, we're going to start with the same thing to try and help them. And for most people, it probably works, right? But then for the handful,
exactly.
You're going to have to try other things, maybe more of something or something different. But it's very similar.
Exactly. And look, sometimes people get a bit, I was going to say toey. I don't know whether that's an expression you use in the US, annoyed. Okay. I don't know where it comes from. Get a bit annoyed about analogies between education and medicine and other branches of health. But I think they hold up pretty well. And sometimes people say, oh, but, in health it's much more sort of black and white and so forth. In medicine it's much more black and white. It's actually not, because in both cases we're dealing with people, and that introduces a lot of vagaries and unpredictability in both cases. There's individual personal characteristics, anxieties, cultural factors. In both cases we're often looking at trying to effect behaviour change, and all of the challenges that entails. But I think in both cases we're looking for the best horse in the race to back. It's not that there's one black and white answer, that it's a binary choice between this and that, but we're looking for the best approach to back. And of course, there's a set of scientific principles that we can apply, but there's also a number of characteristics of individual practitioners that come into play, in this case in the classroom, that allow practitioners to put their own individual stamp and to craft the way that they're applying that science. And that's what we want to see in both health and in education, I think.
Yeah. So Pam, that's actually what when Melissa and I started talking together, that's what I was thinking was when you mentioned dose, it's important to have the research-based scientific approach first as our foundation, and then we can think about dosage. And I just wanted to make sure that we said that, because I was thinking back to a podcast that we had with a teacher and parent of a dyslexic child. And what she said really struck me, and it still strikes me to this day. She said he was getting balanced literacy instruction in his tier 1, and then he was being pulled out for intervention for dosing, more dosing, right? And getting
Mm-hmm.
more of the same balanced literacy in that. So I thought it was important just to kind of reference that like we're starting with the foundation of when we're talking about that dose or that repetition, it's based in scientific evidence and practices that align.
That's really important, Laurie. And, this can work for us or against us. And I guess, this is one of the big problems that people in what we might call science of reading circles have with something like reading recovery, for example, that's an increased dose of a weak intervention. So, we're almost moving in, if we extend the analogy, we're almost moving into homeopathy kind of paradigms here. So if we've got a weak tier 1, and our tier 2 is to deliver more of that low impact teaching at tier 2, then we shouldn't expect to see significant change. And of course, that's what so much of the reading recovery literature tells us, then, that when we're basing our tier 1 instruction on models of reading that don't actually have a cognitive science empirical foundation to them, ideas about reading being a natural thing for children to do and children needing to be immersed in text and all of those lovely ideas, but that's all they really were, lovely ideas that didn't bear up. And then when we identify struggling learners, and by the way, I think it's very strange to have a tier 1 model that assumes a high rate of failure and has a product waiting over here for those students who we know are going to fail in that model. I think that the very term, I don't know, and I know we didn't log on today to talk about reading recovery, but it is part of the balanced literacy landscape. Yeah. But the very idea that any child should need to recover from their tier 1 instruction, did no one stop and think, what that language is saying? But then the inverse is also true. When we have a strong tier 1, then for most children it does work to increase the dosage as long as we have a strong model, we've got a good instructional scope and sequence, we're using instructional time really wisely and carefully. As Anita Archer says, cut the fluff and teach the stuff. So make sure that there's not time being wasted in a literacy block. Then we can feel confident that for the students who our monitoring tells us are not quite where they're meant to be, we can provide more of that high quality intervention to, in most cases, catch children up at tier 2, if not then at tier 3. So it can work for us or against us.
Yeah. And I'm assuming we could catch them up at tier 2 or tier 3 because there's so many less of them.
Exactly. And I think sometimes that's where, in my experience, I've been able to, if you like, cut through with school administrators and leaders, that idea that this is not just an ideological question of changing the way you're going to teach reading in your school. It's a question of reallocation of resources, because you're not going to receive extra funding next year or the year after. You've got a certain amount of funding. How are you going to use it to maximise success for the largest number of students and ensure that the students who do need intervention resources are actually going to be able to receive it? And of course, the most efficient way to do that is to teach really well at tier 1 and have the majority of your students succeeding academically and behavioural and emotionally. I don't think we talk quite enough about the impacts, the flow-on effects for behaviour and social emotional regulation in classrooms when children are on track with reading and no doubt with numeracy as well. Reading is my thing, but I think a lot of what we're talking about applies to numeracy too. But that's very good for children's mental health to be succeeding academically in the classroom. But then, yes, inevitably there will be some children for whom that Tier 1 intervention isn't enough, but then we've got the resources to meet their needs, bearing in mind that if we just let things go, by the time children get through to grade 3, grade 4, and they're behind, now we need a lot of resources. And most schools just don't have such resources available to them.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Well, it's funny because I had pulled out a couple of the balanced literacy bingo items for us to talk about. And we already talked about one of them without saying it because our conversation took us there. So, and it was a listener one. So I just want to make sure we say it because we asked our listeners for input. So we really talked about systematic phonics teaching is just for Tier 2 instruction. And obviously we just debunked that. It's not. So.
and unfortunately, that is a problem. It's a problem in some schools in Australia. I'm certainly aware of schools that, and in some education jurisdictions as well. There are some senior education policymakers and administrators who will accept, which sounds like a funny verb to be using in relation to high quality reading instruction, accept the use of systematic synthetic phonics as an intervention, but not as a Tier 1 instruction. And of course, that's incredibly confusing for our weakest readers to be exposed to one kind of teaching in Tier 1, be pulled out and exposed to a completely different model of instruction in Tier 2, and then going back into Tier 1. If we want to lose our weak readers, I could think of no better recipe.
Yeah. I don't even know why we would think that is a good idea.
I feel like it's the equivalent. I mean, I'll probably catch flack for this, but I feel like it's the equivalent of the thought of oh, I'm going to eat a salad and then I'm going to eat a cheesecake. It's just it's an unhealthy way to approach eating. It's
Absolutely.
an unhealthy way to approach education, right? Like that. But I don't even know if that's the right comparison, but they negate each other, right?
Well, it's unbalanced, that's for sure.
Unbalanced, yeah.
It doesn't honour that word balance in any way, shape, or form.
I do think, though, I'll give you a little bit of flack for it, is that I think your body can handle that, right? Okay, you ate something good, all right, you ate something not so good, your body can even it out. But for a kid learning how to read, I don't think they that is just too much for them and their brains to figure out what's going on over here, and try and make sense of it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we do need to remember, I think, just how complex this reading thing is for a significant proportion of children. I think what has been the saviour of balanced literacy in many respects is the fact that we don't know the exact percentage. Let's say, for argument's sake, 60% of kids get there via balanced literacy instruction. I would argue, and I think you would argue, that they would perhaps do better with more explicit instruction. They'd almost certainly be better spellers if they had more explicit instruction. So that has saved balanced literacy's bacon in a way. It's allowed it to hang around a lot longer. If it didn't work for anybody, I'd like to think that it would have been rolled back before now. But there's a significant proportion of children for whom reading is anything other than easy, and our job is to make it as easy as possible, to facilitate that access to how the code works, how the English writing system works. And people get all kinds of caught up in, too much phonics, or, phonics does this, phonics does that. Good phonics instruction simply allows children to understand how their writing system works so that they have full access to everything that being a reader facilitates. They can access meaning, they can access bodies of knowledge, they can take themselves into worlds of imagination, they can be building their vocabularies, they can be pondering the use of figurative and idiomatic language, and what on earth does it mean when a writer says this strange thing, expresses this idea in this strange way. That's the reason that we want to knock the code part out of the way early. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for high quality word analysis and teaching of morphology and etymology once children are in the mid, what we call primary, you call elementary school years. I think that sublexical analysis needs to continue so that children gain a deep understanding, and a much deeper understanding than what initial phonics instruction necessarily confers. But I just see good SSP as being a process of removing barriers, to getting to the top half of the reading rope and getting there as quickly and as efficiently as possible, because then we're just opening doors, and children are not seeing closed doors, they're just seeing long corridors of possibilities.
I'm ready to jump into a couple others if you're okay with that. So
go for it.
These two both have to do with something I think is one of the things I hear so much about, which is the love of reading. Mm-hmm. And so number 7 said the explicit teaching kills the love of reading. And then number 18 is that the goal of balanced literacy is for children to love reading. I know Lori and I both have a lot of thoughts about this, but we'll hear yours first.
Well, I think, again, it's just one of those ideas, those tired old memes that have been trotted out without any evidence to back them up. And I think what kills a love of anything is not being able to do it. Children don't 100%. Enjoy doing anything that they don't understand and that they can't do and that they don't experience success in. Now, the flip side of that is, or perhaps a corollary of that argument, is that learning has to be fun. And, I just don't know what fun means in this context. Does that mean children have to be laughing and smiling all the way through a lesson and have to be visibly enjoying themselves? Or do they need to be engaged with learning and prepared to try things that are a little bit difficult and experiencing the satisfaction of mastery? Is that fun? I think we've got to take this fun word out of the mix, because what's fun for me and what's fun for you are not necessarily going to be the same thing. Fun isn't something that we can easily measure. So, this idea that teaching something explicitly kills the love of that thing, well, what would pianists say about that? That, being taught explicitly the relationship between the notation on the page and the keys in front of them. Did that kill their love of the piano? It probably involved some effort and some repetition. And, we know pianists have to do scales and things like that to the point of automaticity. And, there's probably a bit of tedium in that, but there's also a sense of mastery and accomplishment. And the other part of this, of course, is this whole idea that, and there's been quite a bit of discussion about this in the last week or two on social media that you've probably seen, this idea that children have to love reading. And Lynn Stone said in a blog post recently, it's really none of our business whether children love reading. Our business is that they can read. And in that sense, teachers are at the front line as public health practitioners, really, because literacy is a public health phenomenon. We know that being literate casts a very long positive shadow across people's entire lives, and being illiterate also does. It casts a negative shadow. I want children to be able to make those choices about how they use their reading skills, and those choices might change at different points in their lives and for different purposes. But it's about choices in the same way that when we teach history, does every student have to love history? Does every student have to love art or music or sport? Why is it that everybody has to love reading? And I think we really need to stand back and question that. They absolutely have a right to be a proficient reader, and we have a responsibility to ensure that all children are proficient readers. And again, that's another thing that's there's been some discussion about this week about what percentage we should be aiming for, and it's somewhere above 95%, and then through our Tier 1 instruction, and then we're reserving our intervention resources, as we said earlier, for that small percent who need it. But yes, well, first of all, there's no evidence that teaching something explicitly kills a love of that thing. And secondly, it's very hard to love doing anything that you can't do. And thirdly, as Lynn Stone reminds us, it's none of our business what children love and don't love. It's our job to get the teaching right.
Yeah, and I would just say I was a secondary teacher, so I never taught balanced literacy, the whole package. But I still think, I have a master's to be a reading specialist, and I think a lot of the things that came out of that were like, just find the right book for a student. That, and
Yep.
and I fell for that, and I did that for years, and I can tell you that was not the magic bullet. Was to
didn't work, did it?
No. And now looking back, you're like, of course it's not. Like, just helping a kid find even a series of books that they love is not going to help them overcome the things they actually need in decoding.
Exactly. I mean, and we don't say, find the right piano for a student, or find the right bike.
Yes, I know. I was thinking, my daughter plays soccer. I was thinking, I guess we found the right soccer ball because she loves soccer.
Yeah,
found the right ball.
That's right.
So, I mean, it's
got nothing to do with all the skills that.
Right.
Yep.
Oh my gosh! All right, so I'm hoping we can talk about another one. Melissa and I have two more lined up for you. This is number 19. This is from a listener. Give them time. They'll catch on or catch up. This one was one of my personal favorites because I think it's favorites in the way that we have to address it because it leads parents and families and caregivers on so much, and it leads children on too. And they know something's wrong way before we do.
Look, I think this one, I think provokes a level of discomfort for a lot of teachers, particularly teachers who have moved away from balanced literacy. I don't know whether you've read the guest blog post on the Snow Report written by Sue Knight a couple of years ago called it's a school leaders sliding doors moment, and Sue is a principal at a school in Ballarat in regional Victoria, about an hour and a half from where I live, and she's written. I really do recommend people read her blog post. I think it's a very powerful personal account of what it was like as a school leader to recognise where we're not teaching reading in the optimal way, and we need to make changes. This is on us. Our data is on us. It's not about the children, or the data isn't the children's fault. The data is our responsibility, and they change the way that they teach reading. But Sue references that very statement of people, teachers almost kind of putting their hands behind their back and crossing their fingers as they said things like that, not crossing their fingers because they were lying, crossing their fingers because they were hoping that that's what was going to be the case because they didn't actually know what to do when parents came to them and said, look, I'm concerned. My son or daughter, seems to be really struggling. And in many cases, all that teachers have got to say in that situation is give them time, they'll catch up. Well, maybe a small percentage of children do catch up. I think it probably is a very small percentage who just happen to catch up. I think what schools sometimes don't see, particularly schools in more middle class areas, is the level of tutoring that's going on in the background that parents are accessing. And if there's some catching up going on, it's because there's some one-to-one tutoring going on. And guess what? Nobody provides one-to-one tutoring that is characterised by more balanced literacy instruction. One-to-one tutoring gets down into the weeds of how the writing code works and explicitly teaches children who've got gaps in their knowledge about the writing system. It teaches them how phonemes and graphemes relate to each other. It teaches them how to decode through the words. So, this idea that children are going to catch up is unfortunately, in most cases, simply untrue. And where there is some catching up happening, it's because something else is going on in the background. And I think that protects schools. I think we need to lift the veil on this because there are schools whose data, in Australia we have a national assessment monitoring system called NAPLAN, the National Assessment Program Literacy and Numeracy, and that looks at literacy and numeracy, as the name suggests, in years 3, 5, 7 and 9. And I think there are a significant number of schools in, as I said, relatively more middle-class areas, and we take socioeconomic status into account when we look at NAPLAN data, so we can compare schools with like schools in terms of level of social advantage. But there's, I suspect, a significant number of schools who are getting a sneaky lift in their NAPLAN data because of the efforts of parents. And so that means that they feel that they don't need to change their instruction because, look, our data is okay. But if there was a proper interrogation of what's going on, we would find that there's other factors there, and B, the tail of the curve is not always being lifted. And, there are always children who miss out on those extra intervention services. So, the idea that children are going to just catch up, I think, is really just crossing our fingers and saying a little prayer and hoping that some of them do, but not knowing why they do.
I was just going to say, I can see why parents might buy into that or go along with it. I know that, I have a 4-year-old, so you often hear things like, oh, well, they develop at different times. Like, don't worry if they don't do whatever it is, potty training, or, if they don't do that yet, they'll get it. Like, it'll come. So you can see how, like, going right into school, you can, as a parent, you'd be like, okay, they might not get it now, but they'll get it.
It's very true, Melissa. It's very true because, we do know that, the age at which children walk, for example, some babies walk at 9 months, some babies walk at 18 months, and pediatricians are happy with both of those as long as there's no other, red flags for concern. So there is a lot of variability in those biologically primary skills. There's variability in the age at which the first words start to emerge and when children start to put words together. But when we're looking at something like reading, which is biologically secondary, it's one of the things that we need to be explicitly taught if we're going to master it. And yes, as we said earlier, there's a small group of children who do seem to need only quite light touch instruction. And, we can look at Nancy Young's ladder of reading and writing, that group who are right up the top in the green. But we don't design entire education systems around the extra benefits, I suppose, that those children have for whatever reason. So yes, there is variability in a lot of aspects of child development, but because reading isn't one of those biologically primary skills, we actually want to be looking for low variance in children's progress and to be having, rather than a normal bell-shaped distribution of achievement in reading, we want it to be a more squished up, and I'm pushing my hands together here, which isn't very good for a podcast for audio purposes, but we want the curve to be more peaked and pushed across to the right, of course, on reading achievement. And one of the ways of achieving that is through low variance instruction, so that children aren't doing something different in, at every year level, or there's not a high level of variability across classrooms in a school, or when relief teachers come in, they're doing something different, and children are being exposed to a whole mess of methods. But we're really wanting to not see that high variability in reading proficiency that we're happy to tolerate in other areas of development. And I think that, that's an important kind of pause for consideration there.
It's a really helpful distinction. I appreciate it as a parent here. All right, I think this is our last one from your bingo card to talk about is number 8, and this is more focused on the teachers, and that it says teachers should choose what they think is best.
Oh boy, where to start with this one? I think, if we go right back to the teachings of Kenneth Goodman, this was one of his central pillars, really, that the teacher is the expert in the classroom. And my take on his writing in this space is that, and others may have different interpretations, I accept that, but my take is that he was a bit almost anti-intellectual in his approach to academic research. So, we know that for decades, teachers haven't been taught research methods. They haven't been taught how to critically appraise research, how to be critical consumers of research. So this idea that the children in your classroom better than anybody else, so you'll know what's best for them. Well, yes, a teacher, if you're a classroom teacher teaching 25 grade 1 students, and I've never walked into that classroom, yes, of course you know them better. You know something about their backgrounds, their families, you know who the extroverts are, the introverts are, who's got really good language skills, whose language skills are not so strong, who are the English language learners. You know lots about them that's really relevant and important for your everyday work as a teacher, as an educator. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily bringing the strongest theoretical foundations to your work or the most recent evidence-based ways of thinking about teaching to your work. So, and I think we've done a big disservice to teachers with this idea that, you're the professional, you're the expert, you decide. And sometimes people, if we go back to our earlier conversation about analogies with health and medicine, people think that practitioners in those disciplines get to make their own decisions. Well, newsflash, in most cases they don't. And in fact, the hallmark of professionalism in many other disciplines is alignment with evidence-based practice. And that's really the the sword that practitioners in other disciplines live by, fall on sometimes. When was the last time, I don't know about in the United States, but I can't think of any time in Australia that there's been a professional action against a teacher for not teaching a child to read. But there are professional actions against doctors and nurses and psychologists when they get their practice wrong. So this idea that, that the teacher is the expert and we should just close the door and let them do their own thing is not how it works in other professions who are working to a high level of public accountability in how they make decisions. I often use the example of chest pain. If one of us, and I hope this doesn't happen, if one of us later in the next 12 hours or so experiences such bad chest pain that we go to our local emergency department, the doctor or nurse who triages us isn't going to be making up their own way of triaging someone who turns up with chest pain. They're going to be following a care pathway, and that care pathway is dictated, for want of a better word. It's a protocol that everybody has to follow, because again, it's about low variance. You don't want to be getting an ECG just because that person's on duty in the emergency department when you go in, but if you go in at a different time, you're going to be reassured and told, well, the last person who came in with chest pain was having a panic attack, so I don't think we need to give you an ECG. So I think we need to step back and really have a big think about what professionalism means. And in most professions, it means a highly constrained form of public accountability and scrutiny. And so if teachers want and I think, what we would like to see in Australia is a much higher level of esteem for teaching and education in the community. But I think the trade-off for that is that level of accountability in the same way that we see high levels of accountability playing out in other professions.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if we can just kind of segue into, we had talked too about higher education, and
yep.
Lori and I talk about this all the time on our podcast about our experiences in higher education that didn't quite prepare you to be that teacher that knew exactly what to do for your students.
Yeah, I feel like, in fact, it prepared us with incorrect ideas.
Right, like
that then were
book that they love.
Right.
That then you had to undo.
I had to undo, but before that, I had confirmation bias because the curriculum told me that those ideas were right. And then I went into, oh my gosh, what? I don't actually know what I'm doing. And then I have
really
this whole body of
elaborate,
research. Yeah.
Sorry, it's a really elaborate form of gaslighting, really,
Yes,
isn't it?
Very much.
That goes on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
well, we're making some changes. Well, in Australia, we've faithfully followed the United States in all things reading. Although reading recovery came from our side of the world, not from Australia. It came from New Zealand. So our side of the world gave you reading recovery, but you very much gave us whole language and balanced literacy. And we've been faithful followers. And now we're like you are, there's all these islands of activity trying to make good on translating decades of cognitive psychology evidence into something that's accessible and usable by teachers. Most of our universities, bear in mind that in Australia we only have, wait for it, about 40 universities. So we have, our landmass is very similar in size to North America, but our population is much smaller. I think our population is about 27 million. And unlike the United States of America, we don't live right across Australia because there's a vast desert in the middle part of Australia. So most of our population is down the eastern seaboard, and then Adelaide and Perth and Darwin, but predominantly eastern seaboard. So we've got 40 universities, but they are predominantly still teaching balanced literacy to pre-service teachers. I'm very proud of the fact that Latrobe University has been the first mover in this space to formally say we are not teaching balanced literacy. My colleague Tanya Seri and I established the SOLAR Lab, the Science of Language and Reading Lab, in the School of Education in 2020. We have amazing support from our Dean, Professor Joanna Barbusis, who interestingly by background is a secondary art teacher and understands the importance of explicit teaching and values the importance of explicit teaching. So she's been tremendously supportive of our efforts. This year, as it happens, and again, bear in mind our academic year is a calendar year, so our students have literally just come back this week, and so this is the first week of March. I'm not sure when this episode is going to go to air, but students coming into our Bachelor of Primary Education degree this year, our 4-year bachelor's degree, are going to be learning, they're going to be classroom ready for structured explicit literacy teaching, call it science of reading, call it what you will. They will learn about balanced literacy. And I think this is really important because when they go out on teaching rounds, on their placements, in many cases they're going to be going into balanced literacy classrooms. So part of our job is going to be to prepare them for the conversations that they need to be having. But, you know, it used to puzzle me, that's probably a nice euphemism, that, and I think this still happens in most universities, that students graduate not even knowing that the teaching of reading is controversial and contested. They're given balanced literacy as a thing, as a package, and you would, I think you described this, Laurie, that, you know, you were just told this is the way you teach reading, without even, you know, knowing about the fact that in our case in 2005 we had a national inquiry into the teaching of reading. That was 5 years after your national reading panel. Our library at Latrobe University didn't have a copy of that that report in its collection. It does now, because that didn't align with the ideologies and philosophies around how reading was taught. So our students are going to be classroom ready to teach explicitly with a scope and sequence, not just phonics, but, you know, right across the reading rope. They're going to understand theoretical models of reading, the simple view of reading, the 4-part processor model, dual processing theory. But they're going to be classroom ready, but they are also going to be able to have conversations because they're going to need to be able to have those conversations about why they're not teaching balanced literacy, why they want to teach the code explicitly using decodable texts in the early days and so on and so forth. We're starting to see some pressure from our federal government around changes in initial teacher education. So hopefully we will see some more universities following suit. My mild anxiety in this space is that universities will say, yes, we're going to change, and they'll change the terminology in their curriculum documents and syllabus documents, but they won't change the substance of what they actually teach. So call me cynical or skeptical. Maybe skeptical is a better word. We will be able to withstand any level of scrutiny with respect to what we're doing at Latrobe, because we are so openly advocating for initial teacher education based on the science of reading, bearing in mind that the science of reading is a body of knowledge. It's not a pedagogy. And so, you know, our students are going to hopefully be research literate, able to access and critique new research and change their practice as time goes by, as the evidence changes. So we're very excited. We don't want to be alone, but we don't want people saying that they're doing it and only doing a window dressing exercise in the process.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Pam, I have so many more questions that we definitely don't have time for today. I could talk. I would love to hear so much more. But Oh my gosh, I just think it's amazing. First, that you're educating your pre-service teachers on what balanced literacy is, because they should know that going out into the world, and then also that they're going to be the constituents for structured literacy. Like, they are going to be able to help educate the teachers who don't know, right? And that might be their first time hearing or seeing it.
Well, we hope so. We're hoping that our students will be graduates of choice and employees of choice when they graduate. We're hoping that schools are going to be looking for Latrobe graduates because of their level of classroom readiness.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking for Latrobe graduates over here. Yeah.
I'll let them know that. They'll be excited.
Give them my address. So I want to make sure that we give you a moment to mention, because I keep thinking, like, you know, we're talking about what higher education can do to make change, right? We have these, you've told us about your fabulous pre-service teachers who are going to be prepared for the classroom in a way that teachers haven't been in the past, which is super exciting. And I'm just wondering if there are teachers out there teaching who are hearing about this or who are wanting to learn more about structured literacy. What could they do? I know you have an online course, like a short course. So I want to make sure you plug that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Laurie. So Tanya and I have established 3 short courses, and we're just about to hit 7,000 in the number of registrants who've gone through those short courses, which we're really delighted about. And that's 7,000 since September 2020. So we have an introduction to the science of language and reading short course that runs over 4 weeks, and we just finished that this week, but we'll be doing that again in August, and that's open to anyone anywhere in the world. And you know, we had people from the UK online with us on this one, and it's a very flexible online delivery, so people can beam in real time, or they can pick up recordings. They can interact with each other via discussion forums, and we provide lots and lots of resources that people can download, and it's very inexpensive. Then we do the Science of Language and Reading Intermediate short course, which is run over 5 weeks, and we're starting that next week. And so that's a deeper dive and getting into more deeply into language. We talk about language disorders. We talk about some of the language of psychometrics, of testing, of, you know, what's a norm reference test, what's a criterion reference test, what are means and standard deviations when we're talking about interpreting test data. And also we look at some cognitive science principles of explicit teaching, cognitive load theory. And then our third short course is the Science of Language and Reading, the secondary school perspective. So there we're trying to do 2 things. We're trying to give some tools to secondary teachers across the curriculum who are trying to support students with weak literacy skills, because we know way too many children in secondary years do have weak literacy skills, but also I guess trying to help secondary teachers who are wanting to further develop those skills in the capable students as well. But probably it's more the first group where teachers are saying, well, I'm a maths teacher and I didn't sign up to teach reading. Even English teachers didn't sign up to teach reading. But there's this growing realization that if I can't do something about this, or if I at least don't understand it, then my job is going to be much harder. And I think it's a very big ask of secondary teachers that we're asking them to deliver their curriculum and deal with the fact that in many cases they've got students in their year 7, 8, 9 classes who might have reading and writing skills that are more at a grade 2, grade 3 level. And it amazes me that secondary teachers don't riot in the streets, to be honest, because that's not what it should be like for them. So that's our short courses. And then there is a language and literacy specialisation in the Latrobe Master of Education, and that's a fully online offering, which is a deeper dive into all of the areas and some more that we cover in our short courses. So we look at linguistics for reading instruction, all that nitty gritty in the weeds stuff about what's a schwa vowel, what's a phoneme, a grapheme, what's stress in words, why does understanding about stress in words matter, how do you apply knowledge of the history of English to understanding spelling patterns. So we love teaching that. We had 40 students enrolled last year for the very first time that we offered it, and we've got 140 enrolled this year. So we're very pleased with the level of uptake in that. And I can provide you with some links if you want to put those in the show notes.
I've already got them linked in the show notes.
Oh, you're so good.
You got it.
You are so good.
As you were talking, I was searching. You
were Googling. Fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So I know we could keep going forever, but we don't have forever. So
we don't have forever.
Is there any last thing that you want to share with our audience just to wrap us up? Last piece of advice or
look, not a piece of it. Well, I would just want to encourage everybody who listens to your program to keep doing the wonderful work that they're doing. I have such a level of awe and respect for classroom teachers. I do, wherever I possibly can, get into classrooms, and I'm always reminded of the complexity of the classroom environment. I have the luxury, I guess, of focusing on reading, literacy, all things literacy. Classroom teachers are dealing with so much in the context of the work that they do every day, understanding the sometimes chaotic and difficult home lives that children have, the stresses on parents, the children who come to school hungry, tired, stressed, easily triggered. There's a lot going on in the classroom. Teachers have got pressures on them from every angle. My hope is that through better teaching of reading, a number of those pressures are alleviated, and that teachers enjoy their work more, quite apart from, seeing the benefits that we see for children. I think there's enormous benefits for teachers as well, but I do just want to give that shout out and say how much I respect the complexity of what teachers are dealing with every day in their classrooms.
We could not agree more.
It's very confusing to be a teacher right now. Yes.
Absolutely. And we need to really look after our teachers and nurture them and keep them in the classrooms because they're, as I said, they're frontline public health professionals, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we are so grateful that you gave us so much of your time to talk today, and I kind of want to enroll in one of those short courses. I was like, Melissa and I
don't think you learn much new.
Oh, no. I feel like I learn something new every time I podcast with someone, every time I read something. It's just so amazing that even after all this time, you can still learn something new. And plus, it'd be really fun to learn from you. And Tanya.
Well, we do learn a lot from our interactions with our participants. You're absolutely right, because they ask us questions that make us pause and think, oh, that's a really good question. We have to have a think about that, or we have to do some reading to come back and answer that question well. So the learning is very two-way.
Well, same here, and we're really happy that we got to have this conversation today. So thank you so much for having it with us.
Oh, thank you both. It's been an absolute delight.